Audrey Sinclair had exactly 4 minutes to get from the parking garage to the 32nd floor of the Meridian Hotel, and she had just spent 2 of them arguing with a revolving door. It wasn't entirely her fault. The heel of her left boot had caught in the gap between the door panel and the marble floor, and for one excruciating moment she had been trapped. Spinning slowly in full view of the hotel lobby, one arm stretched backward gripping her portfolio case, the other braced against the glass. A family of tourists had watched. A bellman had pretended not to. She wrenched herself free, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the elevator bank with the particular dignity of someone who has just done something mortifying and refuses to acknowledge it. The gala was already underway. She could hear it, the low orchestral hum filtering down from somewhere above her head, the muffled clink of crystal. Audrey was not supposed to be here as a guest. She was here because the Coalition for Northern Youth Arts had hired her firm to document tonight's fundraiser, and her colleague Pierre had thrown out his back this afternoon, and because Audrey Sinclair was, apparently, the kind of person things happen to. She punched the button for floor 32. The elevator didn't come. She punched it again. A voice came from just behind her left shoulder. "It's out of service." Audrey turned. The man standing there was in a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He was looking at his phone with the particular expression of someone who has never waited for anything in his life and finds the current situation mildly offensive. "The service elevator is around the corner," he added, not looking up. "Thank you," Audrey said. She turned, took 3 steps, remembered she had no idea where the corner was, and turned back. "Which corner?" He finally looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a slight recalibration. Left. She went left. She found the service elevator. She pressed the button for 32, and only then noticed that a long smear of motor oil from the parking garage door handle was now decorating the left cuff of her white blouse, directly below the blazer. Fantastic. The gala was everything the photos in her briefing package had promised. Soaring windows overlooking downtown Toronto, tables draped in deep blue linen, enough candles to be a fire hazard. Audrey found her event contact near the check-in table, collected her photographer's lanyard, and was finally, mercifully, doing her job. Circling the room with her camera, looking for the moments that made a fundraiser feel like something more than an expensive dinner. She was photographing a pair of elderly women laughing over champagne when she stepped backward to get the angle right and walked directly into a tray. Time does strange things in moments like that. The silver tray tilted. The 2 glasses on it began their slow, inevitable arc. Audrey spun and grabbed one out of the air. Genuinely grabbed it, champagne sloshing but contained, and the second one hit the sleeve of the man behind her, the man from the elevator. He was looking down at his jacket, then at her, then at the glass still somehow in her hand. "I caught one," she offered. A long pause. "You did. The other one I'm less proud of." His jaw tightened. She braced herself. Instead, he took the glass from her hand, set it on a nearby table, and said with extraordinary calm, "Do you work for the hotel?" "No. Coalition for Northern Youth Arts." She held up her lanyard. "I'm documenting the event, and I am so sorry about your jacket." He looked at it again. The stain was pale. It was champagne, but it had caught the lapel and the shoulder in a sweep that could not be ignored. He shrugged it off, folded it over his arm, and said nothing for a moment. She was about to apologize again when he spoke. "You actually caught one." "Reflexes," Audrey said. "I have a younger brother. You develop them." Something passed across his face. Not quite a smile. "I'm Garrett Ellison." She recognized the name. She suspected most people in this room did. Garrett Ellison was the reason this gala existed. The lead donor for the Coalition's new Community Arts Center in Sudbury. A man whose company, Ellison Development Group, had quietly reshaped the skyline of half a dozen Canadian cities over the last decade. He was known for 2 things professionally: delivering ahead of schedule and never doing anything for purely sentimental reasons. "Audrey Sinclair," she said. "Again, your jacket." "It's a jacket." He picked up the glass of champagne she had caught and handed it to her. "You look like you need this." She did. She took it. "Are you always this calm when people ruin your things?" she asked. "It depends on the person." He glanced at her camera. "How long have you been doing this?" 7 years. Event work mostly, but I also do documentary projects." She paused. "Is this your way of changing the subject so I stop apologizing?" "Is it working?" "Somewhat." He almost smiled. It was a near thing, the corner of his mouth a fractional shift, and then it was gone, and he excused himself to speak with someone across the room. Audrey watched him go, and then turned back to her camera and told herself to focus. She was here to do a job. She did not quite succeed at thinking about nothing else. Garrett Ellison moved through the room the way certain people do. Not loudly, not with performance, but with a gravity that made conversations adjust themselves around him. She caught him in the background of several shots without meaning to. The second time she reviewed her camera roll and noticed she deleted them. She was packing up near midnight when she heard him again. "Your car service app just sent you a notification." She looked up. He was standing near the coat check, his ruined jacket over his arm. "How could you possibly know that?" He nodded at her jacket pocket where her phone screen had lit up facing outward. "It says no drivers available." Audrey pulled out her phone. He was right. "I can call you a car," he said. "I'm fine, it's -14 outside. I'm Canadian." That one landed. He actually smiled, a real one this time, brief and slightly unwilling as if he hadn't planned on it. "So am I. That's exactly why I know -14 is still cold." She stood there for a moment, weighing her options, and found them wanting. "I'm going to the annex," she said. "I'm going through Bloor. Get in." His car was a black SUV that smelled faintly of cedar and leather and the kind of quiet that costs money. Audrey sat in the passenger seat with her portfolio case on her lap and decided she would be professional about this. "Do you do a lot of events?" she asked. "When they're worth being at?" "Is this one?" "I'm starting to think so." He said it without looking at her, eyes on the road, and she couldn't tell if it meant anything or nothing. She decided it meant nothing. Men like Garrett Ellison said things like that because the alternative, silence, felt confrontational. The city was quiet at this hour. Snow had started sometime in the last hour, light and fine, softening the orange of the streetlights. Audrey watched it through the window and found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't all evening. "Why youth arts?" she asked. It was a real question, not small talk. He was quiet for a moment. "My mother worked 2 jobs for 15 years. I had a lot of afternoons alone. There was an arts center on Danforth that kept me out of the kind of trouble I would definitely have gotten into otherwise." He paused. "When they shut it down for funding, I was 14. I thought about that for a long time." Audrey looked at him. He was still watching the road. "That's not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "Tax incentives. Brand positioning." "Those too," he said, "but not first." She smiled before she could stop herself. The car pulled up in front of her building on Palmerston, and she reached for the door handle. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride, and for not having me escorted out when I destroyed your jacket. It was champagne. It'll dry." Still, he was looking at her in a way that was difficult to categorize, not the appraising look she might have expected from someone like him, but something more concentrated, something that made her feel uncomfortably like she was interesting. "Audrey Sinclair," he said. "Coalition for Northern Youth Arts." "That's me. Good night." She got out. She climbed the front steps without looking back, let herself into the building, and leaned against the mailboxes for a moment with her eyes closed. She told herself she was tired. She told herself it was the cold. She told herself a great many reasonable things as she rode the elevator to her floor, and she believed none of them. The next Monday, Audrey walked into a client presentation at the Meridian's event offices. Her firm had been asked to pitch for the coalition's ongoing documentation contract, and found Garrett Ellison sitting at the head of the conference table. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up from the document in front of him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Mr. Sinclair," he said, and his voice gave away exactly nothing. "Mr. Ellison." She walked to her seat, sat down, arranged her portfolio. Her hands were steady. She was a professional. Their meeting facilitator, a woman named Phoebe from the coalition's board, began the introductions. "Garrett has agreed to take a more active advisory role in the documentation strategy for the Sudbury project. His team will have approval rights on key deliverables." Audrey looked across the table. He was watching her with that same focused expression from the car, except now it was layered over with something that looked distinctly like amusement. "Did you know?" she asked him afterward in the hallway, while Phoebe was fielding a phone call. "I saw your firm's name on the shortlist last week. And you didn't think that would be complicated?" He tilted his head slightly. "Or interesting?" She stared at him. "Those are not the same thing." "I know." She wanted to argue further. But Phoebe reappeared, and Audrey spent the remainder of the meeting doing what she was good at, being excellent at her work in a room where she was furious at one person in particular. She did not look at him more than was professionally necessary. She was aware of him looking at her precisely twice. She found this both irritating and, against her will, difficult to ignore. Over the following 3 weeks, their working relationship took on a rhythm that Audrey told herself was strictly professional. They reviewed documentation briefs. They had 2 phone calls about archival standards. He asked better questions than she expected. She gave him better answers than she intended. Then he asked her to lunch. "The project," he said, when she raised an eyebrow. "You have a boardroom," she said. "You have a camera bag, and you've been in 3 client meetings this week. You need a lunch break, and so do I." He said it with the easy certainty of someone who does not spend much time being told no, and then waited. The restaurant he chose was a small Ukrainian place on College Street. Nothing like the kind of venues she associated with his world, with its laminated menus and hand-lettered specials board, and a server named Bill who called everyone on. Audrey sat across from him in a booth and thought, involuntarily, "He knows this place. You come here," she said, "when I'm in this part of the city." "Why?" He looked at the menu for a moment. "Borscht is better than anything you can get at a hotel." She laughed. It surprised her a little, the realness of it. He looked at her when she laughed, and she noticed he looked at her differently then. The way you look at something that has just done something you didn't know it could do. "Tell me about the documentary work," he said. "Not the events, the real work." She wasn't used to being asked that. Most clients cared about the deliverables. "I've been working on something for about 2 years. Portraits of women in Northern Ontario mining communities, the families, not the operations. What the work does to a place, to people. Have you shown it anywhere?" "Not yet. It's not ready." A pause. "My father was in Timmins for 20 years. Nickel. I grew up between there and here, and I never quite, it felt like something I owed them. A record." She stopped. "I don't usually say that to clients." "I'm glad you did," he said it quietly, with no particular drama attached to it. It landed differently than she expected. They walked back in a direction that had no particular purpose. West on College, through the snow that had decided to start again, and talked about things that had nothing to do with the project. He had 2 sisters. He had been to Churchill once and thought it was one of the most extraordinary places on earth. He had a dog named after a hockey player he refused to name because he found the question annoying. "Which hockey player?" Audrey said. "No, you brought it up. I mentioned the dog." "I didn't mention the name. Now I have to know." "Gretzky," he said after a pause. "His name is Gretzky. Don't." She did not laugh. She was very nearly successful. That evening, walking home from the streetcar, Audrey thought about the way he had said, "I'm glad you did." Plain, with nothing decorative around it, and told herself it was just how he spoke. Direct. Economical. She didn't fully believe it. The following week they were reviewing photography selections in the Coalition's office when he stopped on one image, a woman in her 60s standing in a snowfield outside a community rink, laughing at something off camera, and asked who it was. "My aunt," Audrey said. "From the Northern Project. I brought some samples to show the range of the documentary work." She paused. "She doesn't usually let people photograph her." "Why did she let you?" "Because she trusts me." Another pause. "And because I told her it mattered." He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he said, "You should show this work." "It's not finished." "Some of it is." He looked up. "There's a gallery component being planned for the Sudbury Center opening. I'd like you to consider it." She looked at him. "Is this a professional recommendation or a personal one? Does it matter?" "Yes," she said. "It matters quite a bit, actually." He set down the photograph. The afternoon light was coming through the office windows at a low angle, and he was half in shadow, which made it harder to read his expression. "Both," he said finally. "It's both." She didn't know what to do with that. She packed up her samples and left before either of them could say something neither was ready for. That night she sat with her tea at the kitchen table and thought about a man who had memorized a Ukrainian restaurant's borscht schedule and named his dog Gretzky, and had not told her any of this to impress her, and that was the problem. He hadn't been trying to impress her. He'd just been talking, the way people talk when they've stopped performing. She didn't sleep well. The next morning she arrived at the Coalition offices to find Garrett already there, standing at the window with a coffee, looking out at the street below. He turned when she came in. Something in his expression shifted, quickly, like a door opening, and then immediately being held almost shut again. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He handed her a coffee from the tray on the table. "I got here early." She wasn't sure why that felt significant. She sat down, opened her laptop, and told herself to focus. They worked for 2 hours on the archival plan. He was direct and thorough and occasionally maddening in his precision. She pushed back on 3 of his suggestions, and he accepted 2 of them without argument, and the third one with a caveat she grudgingly admitted improved it. When the rest of the team filtered out for lunch, he stayed. "You've been careful with me," he said. Audrey looked up. "I don't know what that means." "Since the restaurant," he said it plainly. "You've been professional." "Correct. Very competent. Those seem like good qualities. For a working relationship, they are." He stood by the window again. "I'm not asking for anything, Audrey. I just want to know if you're doing it because you want to, or because you think you should." She opened her mouth and then closed it. The truth was she had been doing it because she thought she should. Because men like Garrett Ellison did not walk into your life through a revolving door accident and a champagne catastrophe and mean it. Because she had learned, a long time ago, that wanting things from powerful people was a good way to end up with less than you started with. Because he was technically, in a meaningful sense, connected to her income, she said none of this. "I think the situation is complicated," she said instead. He nodded, once. "All right," he picked up his coffee. "I'll see you Thursday." He left. Audrey sat in the empty conference room for 10 minutes after that, which was 9 minutes more than she needed to collect herself. Let's pause here for a second. If you're reading this in the comments, type maple leaf. Only the ones who've made it this far will get it. Now back to the story. The complication with telling yourself something isn't happening is that it tends to happen anyway. Audrey noticed this over the following 2 weeks in small ways that she cataloged and then firmly set aside. The way he remembered she took her coffee black. The way he read the documentation briefs she sent the same night she sent them and had questions the next morning. Real questions, the kind that required her to have actually thought about what she wrote. The way he was on time for every meeting, without exception, which she knew from experience was a form of respect that more people talked about than practiced. She also noticed the way her chest did something inconvenient every time he walked into a room, which she chose not to catalog at all. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday, which felt unfair. Tuesdays were not supposed to be important. She had stayed late editing a collection of photographs from the Gala. Proper documentation work, no incidental Garrett, when her phone rang. Blocked number. "I have a proposal," he said when she answered. She pulled the phone away and looked at it, then put it back. "You could have emailed." "I could have." A pause. "I wanted to hear how you sounded when you weren't being careful." The quiet in the office stretched out around her. The city noise from the street below felt very far away. "What's the proposal?" she said. "The gallery. I want to formally commission your Northern project as the anchor exhibition for the Sudbury Center opening. Not as a coalition deliverable. Separately, independently contracted." She felt something loosen in her chest. Why separately? Because if it's separate, it has nothing to do with our working arrangement. Another pause. And if it has nothing to do with our working arrangement, there's nothing professionally complicated about me telling you that I can't stop thinking about you. The words sat in the air between them. "Garrett," she said, "you don't have to say anything tonight. I'm going to say something tonight." "All right. This is a significant amount of disruption," she said, "to my work, to my organization, to my general sense of how things were supposed to go. I know, and you should know I'm not. I'm not the kind of person who does things because they're convenient or because someone is asking. I need things to be real. I know that about you," he said. It was so simple it made her throat tighten. "That's the whole problem." She laughed before she could help it. It came out a little ragged. "You're very certain about things. Not about this. Not at all." She sat with that for a moment, the unexpected honesty of it. "What are you certain about, then?" "That you caught the champagne glass." A pause that had something in it she couldn't quite name. "That you told me about your father and Timmons before you'd decided whether you trusted me. That you argued with me about the archival timeline and were right about 2 out of 3 points." Another pause. "That your aunt looks like she's laughing at something wonderful in that photograph, and I want to know every story you have about people who look like that." Audrey pressed her hand to her sternum like she could hold whatever was happening in her chest in place. "Okay," she said. "Okay what?" "Okay," she exhaled. "I can't keep pretending I've been careful because I wanted to be." The silence that followed was warm, which was not a thing she had known silence could be. "There's a Portuguese place on Ossington," he said. "Are you free Saturday?" "I might be. I'll pick you up at 7. You don't know my address." "Yes, I do. You told the event app to save it." A pause. "I'll bring Gretzky. He's good on the streetcar." She laughed again, and this time it didn't feel ragged at all. Saturday arrived with clear, cold skies, and the kind of Toronto winter light that makes the city look like it's been sharpened. Garrett was at her door, at 5 to 7 with Gretzky, an enormous golden retriever who immediately tried to eat her scarf, and they walked to Ossington through streets that crunched underfoot, and they talked about things that mattered and things that didn't, and he took her hand somewhere on Dundas Street with the same quietness he brought to everything, and she let him. The restaurant was small and warmly lit, and smelled of garlic and good bread. They stayed for 3 hours. The owner knew Garrett, called him by name, asked after the dog. Audrey watched this, and thought about what it meant that a man like this had a regular table at a neighborhood restaurant, and a dog named after a hockey player, and had been shaped, partly, by a community arts center on Danforth that someone had let shut down. Walking home, she said, "Tell me something you've never said in a business meeting." He thought about it. "I still write letters by hand. To my sisters, at Christmas. They think it's eccentric." "That's not eccentric. That's," she stopped. "That's lovely." He looked at her sideways. "Your turn." "I talk to my photographs," she said. "When I'm editing, especially the ones from the Northern Project. I think they need to know someone is paying attention." He was quiet for a moment. "They do," he said. "Everyone does." She looked at him in the orange light of a street lamp on Palmerston, and it was the most natural thing in the world to stop walking and to turn toward him, and to let him cup her face in his hands with the same focused gentleness he brought to everything he decided mattered. And then he kissed her, slow and deliberate and careful, the way someone kisses you when they're not doing it casually. The street was empty. The snow had stopped. Gretzky sat between them and leaned against their legs, which would have been inconvenient if she had been capable of caring. Months later, Audrey would try to identify the moment she stopped being afraid. She thought it might have been on Palmerston, or in the restaurant, or on the phone on that Tuesday night when he had said, "I know that about you," in a voice that made it sound like an answer to something she hadn't asked. But maybe it had been earlier. Maybe it had been in the service elevator, in the Meridian Hotel, with a champagne stain and a motor oil smear, and 4 minutes before the gala started, when she had turned and found him not quite smiling at something she'd said. You don't always know when things begin. You only know later that they did. The exhibition opened in Sudbury on a Saturday in March. 23 photographs. Her Northern Project in the main hall of the New Arts Center. Her aunt came down from Timmins on the bus. Garrett stood in the back with his hands in his pockets and watched people stand in front of Audrey's work, and she watched him watching, and she thought about a 14-year-old boy on Danforth who had lost the thing that kept him anchored and had spent the next 30 years building something to replace it. Phoebe from the coalition gave a speech. There was champagne. Audrey held hers very carefully this time, and Garrett noticed, and the look he gave her across the room made her have to look at the ceiling for a moment before she could trust her face. Later, after the guests had thinned and her aunt was in conversation with Phoebe, and Gretzky was asleep under a bench near the entrance, Garrett came to stand beside her in front of the largest print, her aunt in the snowfield, laughing at whatever was off camera. What was she laughing at? He asked. That day. Me. I dropped my lens cap into a drift and lost it for 20 minutes. Audrey smiled at the photograph. She thought it was the funniest thing. She kept saying, "All this fancy equipment and you can't keep track of a cap." She's right. She usually is. He took her hand without looking at her, the same way he had on Dundas Street. Unhurried, certain, like something he had decided and didn't feel the need to announce. She laced her fingers through his. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay, when I'm with you I am." He stopped, tried again. "I've been good at a lot of things for a long time. Buildings, timelines, making difficult decisions quickly. I have never been particularly good at this." He looked at the photograph, "and I find that I don't mind, which is new." She turned and looked at him properly. At this man who had spent years being precise and contained and competent, and had been shaken loose by a woman who walked into revolving doors and talked to her photographs in the dark. "I don't mind either," she said, which is also new. He looked at her then, and it was the same look from the service elevator, from the street outside her building, from every unguarded moment she had collected without meaning to, and she understood, finally, that he had been looking at her like that all along, because he hadn't known how to look at her any other way. She leaned up and kissed him quietly in front of her aunt's laughing photograph, in the building he had built so that someone else's 14-year-old would have a place to go on long afternoons. Her aunt from across the room said something in Ukrainian to Phoebe that made Phoebe laugh. Audrey did not ask what it was. Some things you know without translation.